Hello, everyone. My name is Shashank, and I'm an equity research analyst here at Revelata. And today we're going to be working on the revenue model for Uber, which at its core is actually a software company. So the reason why we're building a granular model is one, simply for evaluation purpose, and two, it's going to help us understand the actual business model of Uber and how Uber generates revenue. It's also going to show us the different levers the company can pull to drive shareholder value. So to start things off, I'm going to go to our Uber input sheet, and this sheet is essentially our playground for our revenue forecasting. If we were building a full-on DCF, we would have other line items like our operating expenses here. So to start things off, I'm going to go over some of Uber's KPIs. So we have their monthly active platform customers, known as MAPCs. We have their monthly trips per MAPC. We also have their total trips on their platform. Then we have their gross bookings and their revenue. Now, if I had to manually input in all this data, it would take a decent amount of time. But I'm going to use deepKPI's Excel add-in data to greatly reduce this amount of time. So this right here is our KPI aggregator. And as you can see, I've already used deepKPI's Excel add-in data to kind of input in some of our historical values for these KPIs. I've already done it for our MAPCs, our monthly trips per MAPC, our total trips, and our gross bookings. So as you can see, I still have to do it for our revenue. So to do so, I'm going to click on this deepKPI tab and click Search deepKPI. Here, I'm going to type in our company's ticker, which is Uber. And right now, it's pulling all of Uber's KPIs and data. Now, I can simply search for revenue and go to Report and Tables. And down here, we can see a segmented breakdown of our revenue. Now to import this, I just click on this box and click Import to Excel. And as you can see right now, it's automatically importing all of this data into Excel form. If not, I would have to manually do all of this. Now our next step is to simply link this to our actual cell. To do that, we just go like this and we just link it to the corresponding cell. And now we have all of our historical data needed. So our next step is to input this data from our KPI aggregator into our actual input sheet so we can use it when we're forecasting revenue. So I'm going to do this for our trips and our MAPCs and monthly trips per MAPC, and then also our gross bookings, and then finally our revenue as well. So now that we have all of our historical data, our next step is to actually project this data into the future. So to do that, we're going to first need some drivers. And the drivers we're going to use are simply period over period changes. To do so, I take the current period's value and divide it by the last period's value and then subtract 1. And I'm going to carry this and do this for our MAPCs and our monthly trips per MAPC. Now, going forward, we're going to take the average of the last 3 years and we're going to hold that average constant and use that as our assumption for all of our future projections. Now, to get the actual numerical value, we simply multiply the previous period's value times 1 plus our assumption, which is the growth rate. And we're going to do that same formula for both our monthly trips per MAPC and then also our MAPCs. Now, our next step is to find the gross bookings per trip. And to do this, we're going to simply take the sum of our mobility and delivery segment gross bookings and divide that by the total trips on the platform. Now, to get a driver, we're going to do the same idea as before. We get the period over period change, and we're going to do that for all of our historical years. Now, our assumption is simply going to be the average of the last 3 years, and we're going to hold that average constant going forward. Now, our next step is to get that numerical value. We do the same idea. We multiply by 1 plus the growth rate. So our next step is to find the actual breakdown of total trips into its mobility trips and delivery trips. And the reason why we do this is because Uber doesn't actually capture 100% of its gross bookings as revenue. It captures a portion of that, which is known as the take rate. Now, Uber has a different take rate for their mobility trips and their delivery trips, otherwise known as their mobility gross bookings and their delivery gross bookings. So if we only had one total trips amount, then we would only get one total gross bookings amount and we would have to apply an overall take rate. However, if we're able to project out the specific delivery trips and mobility trips, then we can generate a specific mobility gross bookings and delivery gross bookings, and then apply a specific mobility take rate and delivery take rate to generate the revenue for the mobility segment and the delivery segment. So to do this, we're going to simply take our mobility gross bookings and divide it by the gross bookings per trip. We're going to do the same idea for our delivery trips and do this across all of our historical periods. Our next step is to find the total percentage that mobility trips were of total trips. To do this, we simply take our mobility trips and divide it by the total trips on the platform. We do that for all of our historical years as well. Now going forward, we're going to simply take the average of the last 3 years. And we're going to do that for both our mobility and delivery trips. And we're going to simply hold that average constant. Now our next step is to find the actual total trips on the platform. To do this, we simply take our MAPCs and we multiply that by the monthly trips per MAPC, and then we multiply that by 12 since there are 12 months in a year. We do this for all of our future years. Now to find the actual mobility trips, we simply multiply the total trips by that percentage, and then we'll do the same thing for our delivery trips as well. Our next step is to find the actual gross bookings for our mobility and delivery segments. To do this, we simply take our mobility trips and then we multiply that by the gross bookings per trip. We'll do the same thing for our delivery segment, and we do this for all of our future projection years. So our last step is going to be to find that take rate, which again is the actual percentage of gross bookings that gets captured as revenue. To do this, we're going to simply divide our mobility revenue by our mobility gross bookings, and we'll do the same thing for our delivery segment. We're going to do this for all of our historical years, and then for our projecting years, our assumption is simply going to be the average of the last 3 years. And again, always feel free to play around with any of these assumptions. They're entirely up to you. So our last step is to find the actual revenue for our mobility and delivery segments. To do this, we simply take our mobility segment and our mobility gross bookings, and we multiply by the take rate for our mobility segment. We do the same thing for our delivery segment, and we do this for all of our future projected periods. So the very last step is to find the freight segment. So Uber has a third segment called their freight segment, which is essentially them providing logistics solutions. To project this, we're going to simply do a year-over-year change, and you do that for all of our historical years. Now we're going to take the average of the last 3 years, and we're going to hold that average constant into the future. Now to find the actual numerical value, we simply multiply the previous year's period times 1 plus our growth rate, and we do that for all of our future years. Now to find the total revenue, we simply just take the sum of the 3 different segments and do that for all of our future years. So thank you. We've officially finished our revenue model for Uber. And additionally, if you want to do a quarterly build, because we did do an annual build here, you do the exact same methodology, and you could also use deepKPI's data and Excel add-in to get quarterly data as well. Thank you for watching.